Welcome to road.cc, I'm Justin Loretz and today we're going to look at the bane of cyclists' lives. No, not dog poo on brand new tyres, but the oral horror show that is the squealing bicycle brake. Nobody likes the noise of squealing brakes on their own bike, and it's pretty irritating when somebody on the group ride has it too. Unlike most of the other components on your bike, like a dry chain or bearing, the noise of squealing brakes isn't counted by the application of lubricant or grease. So, if you're new to cycling, for God's sake, don't go near your brakes with any sort of oil. I know what you're thinking. And you might sit there laughing like, who would do that? But honestly, I've been in bike shops where newbies and all the mechanically sheltered among us have wheeled in a sad-looking bike which once had functioning brakes that woke the dead, but now has non-functioning brakes that will kill you because they oiled them. I digress, let's start with rim brakes. Classically, when we talk about rim brakes, we're talking about alloy rims with nice, smooth, parallel braking surfaces onto which are pressed small, hard rubber brake pads. These are sometimes referred to as brake blocks, but they're pads and that's what we're calling them. Brakes do make noise even when they're perfectly set up, so don't expect all brakes to be perfectly silent even when they're done properly. But in the case of a new, clean, well set up brake, the sound of the friction of the pads on the rim is usually a light whooshing sound. It depends on the rim configuration, material, etc., and the overall condition, cleanliness and contamination or lack thereof in your kit. So we might need to look at a few possible causes for what the noise might be being caused by. Depending on the quality, age and wear that a caliper is seen, the caliper unit itself can become worn and sloppy, both in its fitting to the frame and the pivot assembly that controls the action of the pad carrying arms. Even small amounts of movement or slop here can lead to the caliper itself moving in the direction of the wheel rotation as the brake is applied and the arms close. It's not really a squeal issue, but along with some others that are, it doesn't help. So now's the moment to recenter the caliper. 5mm Allen key in there. Loosen it off so it's fully loose. Apply the brake and this will help center the brake on the rim. Tighten that up, release the brake. Perfectly centered. Brake pads don't last forever. In fact, rim brake pads have a fairly short life if you're looking at optimal braking. Think about them like soft F1 tyres, where the high friction compound offers best performance for half a dozen laps or less, after which the rubber has gone through heat cycles, technically cooks and goes off. Now that doesn't mean a soft F1 tyre won't do 30 laps. It will, it just won't have great performance. In fact, the performance in comparison to the first 6 laps is rubbish. But back to rim brakes. Rubber brake pads are the same. They're great when new, but they get put through some incredible heat cycles and they also get wet and then dry thousands of times, and they suffer from UV damage, that's exposure to the sun, and all these things combine to harden and dry the pad rubber, reducing its ability to generate friction quickly. And this can be a contributing factor as to why those used dry rim brake pads that have been on the bike for a few years, A, don't stop the bike very effectively any longer, and B, make undue noise. Grit and dirt can accumulate, especially in any slots that are present in the pad surface. These are the slots designed to move and manage rainwater, but they're also magnets for grit and dirt. This embedded crapola can lead to lots of brakes that squeal. As the dirt and grit get embedded into the pads, so those harder particles score the relatively soft alloy braking surfaces of the rim. If you've got a bike that you've ridden for years, run your finger up and down the rim's brake track, and likely as not you'll feel one of two things. First, the braking track may be now slightly concave. This is rim wear. Effectively, the gritty, dirty, UV hardened brake pads have over time worn away the parallel alloy of the rim braking surface. You may also be able to feel ridges running around the circumference of the braking track. This is literally where the grit and other debris have been picked up by the brake pad, usually when the compound is hot and pliable from use, and then become embedded in the pad surface. So the next time you apply the brakes, the harder contaminants inside the brake pad begin gouging the alloy rim's braking track. To compound matters, the alloy that's scored away often ends up also being embedded into the brake pad's rubber compound, further exacerbating the problem. That's why if you've removed used rubber brake pads, it's not unusual to see very small shards of alloy embedded into the rubber. These can also be the cause of added rim brake squeal, and worse, if left unchecked, rim wear can lead to rim failure. Now, I clearly recall coming home from a rotc club night in the mid-80s, and the old boy in front of me had a rear rim explode as he finally wore through the sidewall at the foot of the old A46 as it descended into Bath. A very scary thing to happen. So, wear and dirt definitely don't help. Keep an eye on the wear and keep your bike, your wheels and components as clean as possible. If nothing else, when you're chasing down mechanical issues like noisy brakes, it can be a cleaner, nicer job to look into. Brake pads can also slip slightly in the caliper mounts, and this means that the pads may not be properly aligned with the rim's braking surface, and this can in turn lead to uneven pad wear. Usually not more noise, though if the pad touches the rubber tyre, it can be noisy, not to mention very dangerous. So make sure you check it. Pad material. Not every brake pad compound will work optimally with every rim material. It's marginal and one of the least likely to cause brake squeal, but it can have a big effect on the overall braking performance. So if you're due a change or aren't happy with the performance of your braking, have a shopping trip and try a different brand. The main reason your brakes squeal is that you haven't adjusted the pad position properly. Rim brake pads require a degree of toe-in. That is to say that the forward leading edge of the pad must touch the rim fractionally before the mid and rear portions. When you apply the brake, the front tip of the pads engage the rotating rim. The friction between the two and the inherent flex in the caliper and the pad mount then forces the rest of the pad to engage the rim, with the trailing edge engaging last of all. Of course, this all happens in a split second, and we're talking about small differences. It's all so fast that you don't feel it. It just happens. Apart from making the brake feel more progressive, toe-in helps reduce the chance of brake squeal. If pads are set up without toe-in, then the pads can vibrate on the rim as they begin to touch the braking surface. And this is very likely to cause squeal, and wet weather only makes it worse. The amount of toe-in you need can vary, but work on somewhere between 1 and 2 millimeters. So, with your pad in position, take a business card, much like this one, fold it in two, and the two ends together. Slide that between the rear of the pad to about 1/4 of the way in. Take your pad and then adjust the toe, the front of the pad, to be up against the rim, and then back just a fraction, so it's just clearing the rim. So let's look at 6 key things you can do to ensure that you reduce the chance of your rim brakes from squealing. Firstly, toe your brake pads in. Fit fresh pads. Keep your brake pads clean. Keep your bike wheels clean. Keep your brake pads properly adjusted. Clean your rims, checking for undue wear, and ensure brake calipers are properly adjusted. So what about disc brakes? Well, discs are also occasionally known to emit a squeal, and this is almost always due to contamination of the pads and or the rotor. Contaminated disc brake pads are useless. Remove them, bin them, no questions. Don't be tempted to try and revive them. None of the hacks like resurfacing or baking them work sufficiently well, or indeed at all. Just buy new disc brake pads and make sure that you clean the caliper and rotor properly first. Otherwise, you're simply recontaminating the new pads from the off. Waste of money and time. While you've got the old disc brake pads out of the caliper, get a cotton swab or thin cloth with some disc brake cleaner and give the pistons a gentle clean. They can get gummed up and sticky with dirt and old brake dust, A slow returning piston can leave the pad partially engaged or close to the rotor, which can cause dragging or squealing. Use disc brake cleaner if you have it, degreaser if you don't, or hot soapy water if you've nothing else. Just make sure to rinse the whole show with clean water afterwards. While you're there, check your rotors for wear, because they do wear out. Also check your rotors and ensure that they're true. Worn and/or warped rotors make noise. Check the rotor mounting bolts or centre lock nut is tight. Loose rotors cause noise emitting vibrations and squeal, plus they're dangerous. Do this regularly. Caliper alignment is also worth checking. Calipers move. Even though you do them up tight, the braking forces over time pull and twist them into different alignments, and this will present the pads to the rotors at suboptimal angles and can cause squealing. Follow the bedding in process with new pads. It really is worth the small effort. Find a short traffic-free hill with a clear run out. Do half a dozen runs down the hill, applying the brakes with increasing force each time. On each run, you'll sense the pads warming and beginning to bite the surface of the rotor. Front brake pads are easier to feel the bite than the rears, but you'll know when it's done. Some like to douse hot brakes in clean cold water between the bedding in runs. It can help, it's not strictly speaking necessary, it's up to you. Give it a try, see how you go with it. Give your rotor braking tracks a rough up with a clean file, and you can do the same with the face of new pads, and this will help mate them together and speed up the bedding in process. Really though, regular inspection, fresh pads, a proper clean and some care setting the brakes up will rule out the disc brake squealing 99% of the time. Thanks again for tuning into Road.cc. Please do us a favour and like and subscribe this channel to help us get you more content like this. And also check the bell icon to be alerted every time we drop a new video. Until next time, I'm Justin Loretz and you're welcome.